What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Kings of the Queen City Podcast. It's Matt here with Zach. We just put out an episode about the Seattle expansion draft the other day. Now we're moving on to one here the day before the NHL Entry Draft. We're going to cover some of the top 10 teams and their selections, what we think they'll be, any possible draft day trades that could happen, movement around the league that could be going on before and after the draft, what Seattle is going to do moving forward. And we're going to cover some of our favorite teams in the draft and just talk about the prospects a little bit. So we'll get into that shortly. Zach, you got anything to say?
No, hit it right on the head.
All right, cool. So we'll just give everyone the top 10 order that we're going to go over. In case you don't know, the draft order this year from 1 to 10. In the first round will be Buffalo at 1, Seattle at 2, Anaheim at 3, New Jersey at 4, Columbus at 5, Detroit at 6, San Jose at 7, Los Angeles at 8, and Vancouver at 9, and then 10 is Ottawa. So two of my teams are in the top 10, Buffalo, Seattle. Zach has Buffalo in. Zach's other team, Chicago, is not in the top 10 this year, which I guess is a good thing. A little bit, rebuilding Blackhawks, but they didn't earn a top 10 pick this year. So we'll start with the Buffalo Sabres. So I'm going to let Zach go first because, we're both Sabres fans, and we'll just give our insight on what we think they're going to do. And, they have literally endless options here. Being the number 1 overall pick, they can go whatever direction they'd like to.
Yeah, so personally, I really don't think there's like a bad pick here. I think could either choose to reinforce the offense or the defense, and it doesn't really seem like there's a goalie that is very likely to go at 1. So for me personally, I see them taking Owen Power on defense. I think that I've noticed a lot that it seems like nowadays a lot more prospects out of college don't really seem to be NHL ready immediately, and they seem to go straight through the pipeline for a few years and then through their development increases, and then they're ready eventually for the NHL, hopefully. But from the short highlight clip that I watched a few minutes ago before we started, it does seem like he's able to get around very well in the offensive zone and really contribute to that passing play and help set up both his teammates and himself to score, which is definitely a plus that you'd like to see from a defenseman. One thing, though, obviously we have Dahlin already, who's a heavily offensive defenseman already, and it kind of seems like if we were to go for a defenseman, you'd kind of hope that it would be more of a guy that's just a stand-up D-man in the defensive zone and kind of just holds it down in a sense for those guys while they're all going up on the rush and whatnot. But, for me personally, I think right now with Buffalo, you can always trade for a star defenseman if you don't pick up one. But right now we're still trying to ship out Ristolainen, it seems like, and who knows what you could get in return for him. So, I think picking a defenseman here now and then hopefully developing him for a few years and hoping that he comes out looking really good is the right option.
Right. So just for everybody watching too, I just want to give a little disclaimer about both Owen Power and all the prospects. So they're projecting most of these prospects, even the number 1 overall, whoever that will be, to return to where they played last year. They don't expect anybody to make the jump to the NHL this year. You can blame COVID for that. In fact, a lot of these kids played college in the top 10 that are ranked, and they played a very short college season due to that. Some of the kids that played up in Canada slipped a little bit in the rankings because the CHL, which includes the OHL, WHL, and QMJHL, did not play this season. It was all shut down due to COVID, and actually Canada is still in the process of reopening. I know that Toronto just went into phase 3 of their reopening about last week. So, it'll be a little while before hockey is back in full swing there other than the pro leagues. But yeah, so a little bit about Owen Power. Power is a freshman at University of Michigan. Michigan has produced, I believe there's 4 players from Michigan this year ranked in the top 10. And he is a big kid, 6'5" at 214 pounds. Obviously, some of you might be thinking, wow, that's really big. But for a player that's 6'5", he definitely can add a little bit more weight, and that's going to come with his development and, growth over the next few years. I'd expect, once he gets up to about 225, 230, that'll be about his full potential frame. So it's not that far off. But at Michigan this year in 26 games, he had 3 goals, 13 assists for 16 points. That's pretty, high production for a defenseman, obviously, making him the consensus number 1 pick. Or I guess this year there really isn't a consensus number 1 pick, but he is ranked 1 by almost everybody. I think if you're Buffalo and you're looking for that big physical defenseman, he's not quite as stay-at-home as I think I would like him to be, because he can jump up in the rush and he can focus a little bit at times about creating offense, which, like you mentioned with Dahlin and Yoki Haru on this team, and now Jacob Bryson making his mark on the Sabres roster. We do have a lot of offensive defensemen, so I would like to see them maybe go with a defensive defenseman if they decide to go that route. There are a few options in the top 10. And obviously, with all the trade talk around Eichel, Reinhart, Ristolainen, we don't know if number 1 is going to be the only pick that Buffalo has. They could move into another slot later in the draft, because teams are willing to trade their first round picks this year, just because, like I said, with the shortened seasons, and really the only ones that played full years this year were the European skaters. There's not a lot of tape out on players. There's not a lot of stats, especially players that like Owen Power, who's a freshman at the University of Michigan. This was his first season playing college hockey, and albeit it was a great one, they only have the USHL in the prior seasons to go off of that. So it's kind of like a risk reward type of thing with a lot of these players this year. So teams are a little bit more willing to deal their first rounders than they normally would be. So we covered Power. Buffalo obviously can go that route. Depending on what happens down the middle, there's also Matty Beniers, who is the center from Michigan. He played top minutes. He was the freshman as well. For Michigan, he played 24 games. He had 10 goals, 14 assists, and 24 points, which is pretty good for a forward in college hockey, a point per game. He's not overly big, but he does have some size to him at 6'1" and 174 pounds. Again, every forward and every player that you hear about in the draft here, they're going to be a little bit smaller, maybe not compared to the average person, but for an NHL player, they can all add about 10 to 15 pounds, and that'll come with their development, as I said before. But Matty Beniers seems to be a pretty solidly built kid already at that size. I think that if they're looking to go the center route, it would definitely be Matty Beniers. But I've also heard that Sabres are pretty high on William Eklund, and I wouldn't be opposed to the Sabres taking Eklund here. Eklund has been ranked a little bit all over the board. I've seen him as low as 8, 9, dropping into the teens. I've seen him as high as number 3. Eklund played in the SHL this year. He can play center, but he mostly plays left wing. So I would expect him in the NHL to be a winger. I wouldn't expect him to make that shift to center. He's already confirmed he's returning to the SHL, so he won't be on an NHL roster next year. 40 games this year in the SHL. Now, remember, the SHL is all men. So compared to Owen Powers and Matty Beniers, who are playing against kids that are at most, 4 to 5 years older than them, William Eklund was playing against guys that have played in the NHL before, guys that have been in the pro leagues over in Europe for the past 10 years plus. And in 40 games, he had 11 goals and 12 assists and 23 points. That's a really good stat for a kid in the SHL. And he's right up there with some of highest taken players out of the SHL in the NHL draft. He is a little bit smaller, I guess you could say, for an NHL player at 5'10", but he is 172 pounds, so he does have a nice frame to him. The thing I like about his game is he's very productive offensively, but he's also very smart defensively. He knows how to get out of a jam. He knows how to go into the corners, and he knows how to win battles and make the smart pass. And then his transition game actually was one of the best in the SHL this year, whether that be passing or controlled zone entries. He was really good at that. That's something that I think the Sabres could definitely use in their forward group. They don't have as many controlled zone entries as I think they would like to. They have a lot of dump-ins, so I could definitely see William Eklund being an option. I will say this, if they decide to go with Eklund, I think I'd like to see the Sabres move back, making a trade with a team like Anaheim or New Jersey at 3 or 4, because, you always run the risk of the player not being there when you move back, because teams have already built their plans. But at the same time, I think that if you want a player that's not ranked 1, 2, or 3, and you have picked number 1 and you want to move back to get him, moving back is the way to go. You're going to get some type of asset in return, whether that's a prospect, it's an NHL player, it could be another draft pick that we could use in another trade to flip or whatever the case may be. So for me, I think those are my top 3 in any particular order. I think I'm a big fan of William Eklund first. I think I would go Owen Power as my second choice, and then Matty Beniers as third choice for myself.
Yeah, as my top 3, I had Power going to the Sabres at 1, and then I had Beniers going to the Kraken at 2, and then Eklund going to the Ducks at 3.
Yeah. So you had Beniers going to Seattle at 2. Mm-hmm. I think Seattle is going to be really interesting, right? So, I mean, you're a brand new team. You have endless options of where you could go. I mean, they could go way off the board if they want to. There's no expectations on the Kraken this year. Well, I shouldn't say none, because I'm sure there are people out there that are going, oh, they're gonna do the same thing that the Knights did in their first year. But we don't know. They're a brand new team, so they could be, 32nd in the league, or they could be first, or they could be middle of the road. We don't know. I think if you're Ron Francis and the Seattle Kraken, obviously I agree with you. I'm under the assumption, no matter who the Sabres pick, that Owen Power is not there. If Power happens to fall to them, I could definitely see them taking them, because we talked about it in the last pod a little bit. Seattle has definitely built a physical defensive core. But I do think the smarter pick for them, since they do have a strong defensive core already, even though they are a lot of older guys, I would go with Matty Beniers. You find your number 1 center in Beniers. He'll be back at Michigan next year to develop a little bit more. He won't start at number 1, obviously, when he makes the NHL, but he would be your future guy. You're talking 2-3 years down the line, you have Matty Beniers as your number 1 center. I think that's a really good centerman to have.
Yeah, and I think it kind of covers them too, because I mean, they just signed Yanni Gourde, and he just got his surgery. So if his contract doesn't end up panning out like they hope it will, then hopefully by the time his contract expires and they're like, okay, we're going to let this guy go, then Beniers might be developed enough at that point to start for them.
Yeah, exactly. I don't expect his development track to take very long at all. I could honestly see him playing at Michigan for only 1 more year and then making that leap to the NHL. So Anaheim, you said you had
Eklund going at 3.
Okay, so yeah, you had Eklund going a little bit higher than some of the or most, I guess, of the mock drafts that we've seen out there. And Eklund's going to be the wild card of this draft, I think, in the top 10. I could definitely see him going to Anaheim at 3. I do think that Anaheim, again, is kind of like Buffalo and Seattle in that they really can go any direction. They need a lot of different pieces, and they're really not missing any one thing. That's going to kind of be the story for everybody in the top 10. So it's going to be, best player available, what you think that your team needs the most. I could definitely see Eklund going there. And since Eklund is a winger, I wouldn't be shocked to see Anaheim actually go with Dylan Genther. Genther played for the Edmonton Oil Kings. I don't believe he played. Well, they did play 12 games this year in the WHL. And in those 12 games, he had 12 goals, 12 assists for 24 points. So 2 points a game in the W. It's pretty good. He's not overly big, but he's a decent winger that can score. And he's, I think he would fit with Anaheim really well. They definitely got to get their number one center. You got Henrique and Getzlav, who are both declining, and you're going to be in the market for a center very soon here. But Genther or Eklund are both really good choices for them, I think. But Anaheim also, I will say this, they have a very strong history of going with defensemen in the first round. We've seen Shea Theodore go. Obviously now he's a Knight, but I think there's at least 3 or 4 guys in their team that were former first round picks as defensemen. And if they do go defenseman, I would expect it to be Brant Clark. And he played in the OHL, not this year because the OHL did not play. He was on loan for a while, and he at the U18 was very good for a defenseman. 8 points in 8 games played. And then the OHL, there was 57 games played last year, 6 goals, 32 assists for 38 points. And that's for a defenseman to put up those type of numbers. I know it's the OHL and it's, a little bit of a, I don't want to say easier league, but because it's all juniors, people tend to approach that with caution, but I still think that those are some really good numbers for a defenseman. That's not overly offensive, but it's somebody that, he's big. He's 6'2", 190 pounds. He is a big boy. And although he probably won't make the NHL this year, I don't see him having any problems making the NHL next year. So New Jersey at 4, who do you got for that?
So I actually have Jack Hughes' brother, Luke Hughes, going here.
Okay.
I didn't read too much on it because I was kind of just putting these down on the fly, but I did see one mock draft where one of the guys was actually really high, not just on them picking Hughes just to have like a brotherly reunion, but they had actually, I don't remember exactly what they said, but they had spoken on his play and they had a lot of positive things to say on him. I'm sure you can speak more on that, but.
Right. So Luke is confirmed to not be in the NHL next year. He's actually young. He's 17 years old. And he's got a lot to live up to, right? He's joining the company of his brother, Quinn Hughes, who's an excellent defenseman for Vancouver. And then you got your brother, Jack Hughes, who went number 1 overall to the Devils. And while he's still coming into his own, Jack Hughes is insanely skilled. And he will be an extremely good center in the NHL within the next couple of years. Watch him make that massive leap. But Hughes is going to the University of Michigan. Go figure. It seems to be a theme today, but he's already a really big kid at 17 years old, 6'2" and 176 pounds. And this is before going to college and being at the U of Michigan, who, they're a hockey powerhouse. This kid is going to get a lot of weight training done there. I wouldn't be surprised to see him throw 10 pounds on throughout the college season, be up around 185 pounds. He played at the US NDTP this year, which is the National Development Program. They produce a lot of, some of the best American players in the NHL. 18 games played, 4 goals, 11 assists, 15 points. So in my mind, for a 17-year-old on defense, that's really good. I think that he's like his brothers, that he has some really good speed and he's got good hands. He's definitely a player that I think on defense would be more of a jump up in the rush type of player. I haven't seen a whole lot of tape on Luke Hughes, to be honest with you, so I don't want to say too much on his play style. But again, I do think that he's going to be really good, and I'm going to definitely be keeping an eye on him this year at Michigan to see how that translates from his national development game. So yeah, New Jersey could go that route, and then I don't know that they're going to go forward. I don't know if I see that. I think they're okay in that. I think Blackwood is a really good goalie. I believe they have Eric Comrie in their system now, who's he's not going to be a starter in the NHL, but he could definitely be a backup. So I don't think that they're going goaltender. There's not many goaltenders in the draft this year, anyways, and it's number 4 is way too early to go to that. So I could definitely see Luke Hughes being their pick for sure. Next on the list, we have Columbus. We're halfway through now. So what are you thinking for them?
So at 5 for Columbus, I had them picking Dylan Genther.
Okay.
I'll tell you why in a moment as soon as I pull up their stats from last season. They finished dead last in the Central, I can tell you that. And it looks like they got decent production from, I don't know, it looks like their top couple lines had a lot of guys assisting, but they only had it looks like 4 guys break double-digit scoring. So I think for Columbus to add another offensive winger that looked pretty good in his youth so far, I think it'd be real nice to pick him up and develop. And I think, like you said, he has some size to him. So, it could help bring that physical aspect of play as well.
Right. And Columbus is moving in a whole new direction now. Seth Jones is expected to be gone. Whether that's a draft day trade or not, we don't know. We've heard that Chicago's been really interested, and we've heard that Kirby Doc's name has been out there in trade rumors with Seth Jones. So if they pick up Kirby Doc, then you have Doc and Domi down the middle. Even if you don't have Doc, you still have Domi as your number 1 center, and granted, they could probably pick up a center through free agency or a trade to help them out in that position. But I completely agree with you. I think that they are hurting a little bit now on the wing, especially after losing, Josh Anderson in the trade to Montreal. A lot of their guys are getting older. They don't really have a whole lot in terms of what's in the pipeline for prospects. So I could definitely see, them going with Dylan Genther here if Genther slips to 5, which I wouldn't be shocked that he does. And then if William Eklund is still on the board here, absolutely will be gone for Columbus. They would be all over that type of player because he is a complete 200-foot two-way winger with a lot of offensive upside, and that fits Columbus's scheme perfectly. Detroit, number 6.
All right, so I actually have them taking a goalie in Wallstedt.
Okay. Well, early on Wallstedt, I like it.
Like we were talking about it at work earlier. They just traded Bernier away, right? So he's gone now. Well, I'm looking at their stats right now, and between the 3 goalies that they put on the ice last season, they let in, it looks like, almost 150 goals combined between them. And if you don't have like a set starter and you have 2 guys that you're kind of just rotating, it's not good that both of them let in, it looks like, around an average of 70 goals during the season. And compared to the amount that I think that stands for goals saved or something like that. I don't know what the hell that stands for. But anyways, either way, they have a big hole in net, and they've had one for a while now. And when you're a team like Detroit that hasn't been able to score and you can't give your goalie any help, then it's just going to keep compiling all season long. And I think for them to finally bring in a goalie, with Jimmy Howard, he was decent for a while, I guess, but they haven't really, to my knowledge, had a good goalie since Hasek, it seems like. I could be totally wrong on that, but that's how long it's been since I can remember them having a good keeper.
They've had good goaltending here and there. I think that a lot of this is going to be attributed to the fact that, Detroit, once they ended that 25-year playoff streak, to be that good and in the playoffs for that long, you're going to give up good players. You're going to give up a lot of your draft picks and trades. You're going to give up a lot of prospects. And I think that they just never really focused on the net, for one. And two, you have to replenish what you lost. And they've been so focused on the forward group. And now they're waiting for the younger guys to kind of break in, like Moritz Cedar, who they took 2 years ago, was kind of a surprise defenseman pick in the first round. And, he's just kind of starting to come in now. You're used to having Nicholas Cronwell out there and these big body defensemen that block shots, and they just don't have it. So I can understand that Bernier and the other goaltenders let a lot in.
Right. That makes sense.
But I wouldn't mind them going Wallstedt here. I don't know if I see it happening. I think that they're probably going to go defense, and I would expect that to be Brent Clark realistically here. And I think Brent Clark fits that role in Detroit perfectly. He's big, physical. He will block shots. He can create offense for them as well. But if they do go with Wallstedt, like you said, it's going to take some time for him to get there. I'd expect it to be at least 5 years before Wallstedt's playing a game. But he did play in the SHL last year. He's a big boy at 6'3", 212. In the SHL, he had 22 games played with a 2.23 goals against average, which is pretty good in the Swedish league, especially for a young kid at 18, and a 908 save percentage with 2 shutouts. He was 12-10 with his team. It's a positive record, which is good to see. And then at the Sweden U20 tournament, he played 2 games. He must have come in relief in one of them because his record was 0-1. But in those 2 games, he had a 2.4 goals against average with a 923 save percentage. So I think he's pretty athletic, and I think that, looking at gold, if you're going to look at a goaltender, you're in, Detroit possibly can. I think Wallstedt is the way to go. There's not a lot of goaltenders available in the draft this year, but I could see them going with them. And then if they, for some reason, do pass on Wallstedt and Brant Clark here, I wouldn't be shocked to see them make that jump for a centerman. You got Dylan Larkin down the middle, who's going to be your captain, and I believe he is locked up to a contract now. I do believe he got a contract extension for 6 years, I want to say. But you do need some more help there. And obviously they need wingers too. But at this stage in the draft, when you're talking about pick 6, I think the 2 top wingers are going to be gone. And it's going to leave a little bit of centers because there is somewhat of center depth this year in the top 15. And they could go with either Kent Johnson out of the University of Michigan, or you could go with Mason McTavish. And I think McTavish is a little bit of a sneaky pick. He's 6'2", 207. So he's got a really good frame already. He played on loan this year over in Europe because of the COVID restrictions. 13 games in the EHC league, he had 9 goals and 2 assists for 11 points. And the year before that in Peterborough of the OHL, he had 57 games, 29 goals, 13 assists for 42 points. So I think that, if you're looking to add another piece down the middle to strengthen your core going forward, which it's a lot easier to find wingers than centermen, I think that, McTavish might be an interesting pick for Detroit here. Next up, San Jose.
All right. So with San Jose, I actually had them taking a center, and I couldn't. I had a tough time deciding between Kent Johnson or McTavish.
Yeah.
But I ultimately have them going with Kent Johnson.
I agree.
He looked to have a pretty good shot on him from the highlight video that I watched, and I believe he's 6'1", close to 200 pounds, I think.
165.
Okay, so I was thinking of somebody else then. But yeah, he looked to have a pretty good shot on him, and I mean, San Jose, they had the usual guys scoring all the goals for them, like Kane, Hurdle, Couture. But I think I mean, in the time that if they were to take Kent Johnson, I'd say in the time that it would take him to develop, that it'd probably be pretty likely that the Sharks might lose 1, 2, maybe more of those goal scorers, unless I'm totally wrong and they're signed to a contract or something like that. I mean, I would assume by then Kane would probably be gone. And I'm not too sure on the other guys, but they could definitely use that continued goal scoring. I mean, Martin Jones, it looks like he could have been better, but ultimately that comes down to defense as well. But for me, I think the Sharks are most likely going to go for an offensive pick.
Yeah, I agree 100%. They do have concerns in that, but at their position in the draft, with what they have on the roster, I think it's too early to go with goaltending. Defense hasn't really been an issue for the Sharks. They could, change it up on us and go defense and add a young, talented kid to learn from Brent Burns and, all these older guys that they have on the roster. But I don't see that being the case. Like you said, I think that they're kind of grappling for a center right now. And they're a little bit backwards for a team that's at the bottom of the league, right? You mentioned they have good goal scorers on the wing. You got Evander Kane, who, there's, some of the off ice issues and all that, and concerns about whether or not he'll be there. And he does have a large contract. He could be trade bait, whatever the case may be. But you still got Timo Meyer. You got some younger, decent goal scoring wingers. But down the middle, I think that they went downhill pretty fast. You lost Joe Pavelski in 2019 to the Dallas Stars, and you've been trying to replace him since. And I think that if Kent Johnson is on the board there, I think they go with him. He did play second line behind Matty Beniers at Michigan. I think they would be drawn a little bit to the size of Mason McTavish, but I don't know that they would be willing to sacrifice that size for the skill, because I do think that even though, the numbers might not reflect it in some eyes, I do think that Ken Johnson has a little bit more skill than Mason McTavish. But we'll see what happens there. I definitely think it's going to be a center, though, like you said.
Yeah, and I mean, like you've mentioned with other players too, throughout the development, if they do go with him, he's going to put on weight with working with the trainers as well. So, I mean, if you see a lot more upside in one guy than another, even though his frame might be lighter, you can always work with him to just hit the gym more often.
Right. And you know what? I think that if that's a concern, if time is a concern for the Sharks, like they say, we need a center now, even though, like we said, they won't play in the NHL this year. If they're worried about it as soon as possible, I think they would lean towards Mason McTavish, just because his frame is filled out, his skill is there, he can skate decently. But if they're willing to wait on Ken Johnson, who I believe was a freshman this year at Michigan, don't quote me on that. He could have been a sophomore, but I would have to double check it. But if they let him go back to Michigan and play for two more years, or even 3, then you're talking about a kid coming out who, if he's 18, he'll be 21, 22 at that time. He'll be growing into his frame a little bit more, and he'll have 4 years of collegiate experience under his belt, and you wouldn't even have to worry about okay, does he have to go through the AHL process? Really, I think that a player like that could absolutely make the jump right away. Number 8, LA Kings. Kings are just a powerhouse when it comes to prospects. I don't think that they need anything down the middle, depending on if there's a trade or not. But you've got Alex Turcotte down the middle. You got Quentin Byfield down the middle. I believe they
also have Athanasiou.
Yeah, Athanasiou, who's a really speedy player, a little bit higher in age, but speedy player. I think that maybe they look at defense here. I don't know. What do you think?
I was thinking. Yeah, I have them taking Edvinsson.
Simon Edvinsson, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Drew Doughty, he's getting pretty damn old now. I don't know how much longer he has a contract with them for, unless he's a free agent. I'm not sure.
I think it's got some term on it, like 2-3 years, maybe.
Okay. But I mean, the Kings for probably the last 2 to 4 years now have defense has definitely been the problem, not offense, I think, in my opinion. Looking at some of the players that they had as their leading point getters, they had a lot of guys get at least 10 goals. One of those being the player that they also traded for in this offseason, Arvidsson, which I think is a really good addition.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're spreading the wealth pretty good, both in goals and assists. And like you said, they don't have an issue at center at all. And now with the addition of Arvidsson, their wingers are looking pretty good as well. So, in my opinion, even though Jonathan Quick is in decline, I mean, you can kind of patch that hole a little bit by adding to defense. And if they take a defenseman like Edvinsson, if Quick is still around by that time, then maybe he'll have developed enough to the point where, you know, maybe he'll have some sort of bounce back season, and then he'll have the support in front of him as well.
Right. So I can't think of his name right now. Do you remember the kid that is in net for the Kings? He was with the Sabres for a while and left us.
It looks like they've got, as their 3 goalies listed from last season, they have Grasenic, Quick, and Peterson.
Cal Peterson, that's it. Yeah. So there were concerns, I think, about Cal Peterson. You know, when he left us to go to the Kings, everyone was excited because he was a highly touted goaltender, and he kind of didn't live up to those expectations right away. I remember watching quite a few games of him this year, and to me, you know, he's not like, you know, jumping off, oh my God, this kid's going to be a stud goaltender. But I think if he down the road is their starter, I think they're okay in that. You know, I don't think that they really have to be like at the draft table going, oh man, you know, here we are at 8, we got to get a goaltender because that's our problem. And like you said, the forward depth is getting a lot better with the Kings, a lot better. You still have Anze Kopitar, who is a Selke candidate. And even though he is older, he's still playing well right now. There's no reason to hit the panic button on him or anything like that. They could trade him. They could. It's a hefty contract, but maybe they get some younger pieces if they do trade him. But even if they don't, you know, you're still winning with him in your lineup. And like you said, Victor Arvidsson, I love Victor Arvidsson. I think that he is a really good player. And for LA, I think that that's the right addition because it brings a lot of speed. And that seems to be the direction that they're going, right? So they want players who, you know, they have a healthy mix of everything. They've got some guys in their pipelines that are really talented skill-wise. They've got some guys that have some really good wheels in Athanasiou, Arvidsson. I think that Turcotte's got some pretty good wheels on him. And then they also have just the physicality. You know, you're talking about Quentin Byfield. He's a massive center. I think he's like 6'3". Yeah, and pretty close to 200 pounds already, and he's 19 years old. So I think that they're, you know, like you said, good down the middle. I think they're okay at the wing. If they're worried about the wing in any way, I don't think that you waste the draft pick this year on it. I think that you can find somebody in free agency to help fill that hole. I wouldn't panic and go in net. I think they can pick somebody up in free agency as well. To split the time with Cal Peterson. And then, like you said, I think they're going to go with defense. And I could definitely see Simon Edvinsson being a guy they pick. Edvinsson is right around there ranked. But you know what? I wouldn't be shocked if Luke Hughes falls that far. And if Luke Hughes is on the table there, I absolutely see the Kings snatching him up because that's their MO. You know, we talked about it with Seattle, and it seems to be a Pacific Division thing, right? So you look at Edmonton, they like the big defenseman, even though they just lost Adam Larson. They like bigger sized defensemen. The Kings have bigger sized defensemen, albeit they're not that good, but they are big. And now Seattle Kraken, I don't think there's a single defenseman on the Kraken roster right now that's under 6'1". So, you're talking about wanting big boys out west that block shots, that play physical games. So I can see the Kings going defense for sure. Edmondson and Hughes would be my picks. I don't know. Do you have another pick there? If Edmondson isn't there, you stick with defense?
Yeah, I would definitely stick with defense for them.
Okay. Yeah, so Byfield 6'4" and 214. I mean, that's
a hefty boy, and they have that nice balance, albeit through the system and starting. I mean, Kopitar's a bigger guy, and then like you said, Athanasiou, he's the speedier guy. So
exactly. And I can't think of names off the top of my list right now, but they do have some decent defensive prospects as well. And those guys are getting pretty close to being ready. I don't know that they are, but they're not far off. A year, maybe two at most. So if then you add a guy like Edmondson to that mix up, I mean, you're going to be talking about the Kings being an absolute powerhouse out west for quite some time once, all these guys take over. Number 9, Vancouver.
All right, so Vancouver, I actually have them taking Clark as a defenseman.
Okay.
Looking at their player stats from last year, they had some decent goal scorers. I mean, you're obviously expecting Brock Besser to score, Bo Horvat to score, and then JT Miller also. I think he's a pretty reliable forward.
Right.
And so, I mean, in regards to them, obviously Holtby, after signing that massive contract, massive letdown for them after performing so well with Washington. Demko also letting in a lot of goals, and while you can fault the goalies to a certain point, they can only stop so many shots, and you need defense to help patch that up. So that's the reason I have them going with a defenseman.
Right. And I agree with you there. I think that their defense is a little bit aging. They do have some youth within the forwards yet. Goaltending, it's hit or miss, but it's just not a good draft for goaltenders either. So I don't see many goaltenders going. Wallsted's really the only guy on this list that I could see going in the first round if they do. But I agree. I think that defense is the way to go to Vancouver. I don't know who it's going to be because at this point in the draft, we're talking about pick 9 here. Pick 8. No, 9.
Pick 9. Yep, you're right.
9. This is where it's going to start getting really hairy because there's not a lot out on these guys. And, the board is probably not going to be what anybody expects it to be. So, out of the top defensemen, you're looking at Hughes. Obviously, you're looking at Power, but he should be off the board well by now. Brant Clark, does he fall? Does Simon Edmondson fall? We don't know. But I think Vancouver does go defense. If they don't go defense, I think they're a prime candidate as well for Mason McTavish if a team like Columbus doesn't scoop him up. I think they would like to add that size down the middle because you do have Elias Pettersson as your centerman. But he's on the smaller side, right? We saw Pettersson get hurt already a couple times in the NHL because his size is smaller. And, McTavish being that big guy, I think that if he's your second line center, right, and down the future, you have Pettersson and then McTavish. We'll say Pettersson goes down for a week and a half with an undisclosed injury. We'll say it's like a hand. Well, McTavish can step in and play that first line role, I think. And he's got that size, right? And then you have the versatility too on any given night as the coach to be like, okay, well, we're going out west. We're playing a big bruiser team like the Kings. They're going to be physical all night. Let's drop Pettersson down to the second line. And, he'll get to play against the guys on defense that aren't as good and aren't as big. And then we throw out Mason McTavish and, he's going to be a problem for them all night. He's going to be hounding pucks. He's going to be all over the front of the net. And he's going to be able to play the body physically and match their energy to keep that competitiveness up. So if they don't go defense, I'm definitely looking at McTavish here if he's not off the board already. And then lastly, we got Ottawa.
All right. So for Ottawa, I have them written down as taking Matthew Coronado.
Okay.
However, upon looking at their stats now, I didn't realize how many productive goal scorers they actually had, despite where they finished in the division. They had a lot of guys contributing, and all but one of their double-digit scorers scored less than 12 goals. So they actually had some decent goal scoring last year. They just couldn't get wins.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's going towards the goaltending and defense a little bit more.
I was probably going to contribute that to how their goalies started out at the beginning of the season, because after the first month or two, they turned it around significantly. But the beginning of the season hurt them a lot, I could tell. But yeah, I did not realize how well they were actually scoring goals.
Yeah, and there were a lot of high scoring games with Ottawa this year, actually. So, like you said, the goaltending and the defense, I think that right now I'd be more concerned about the goaltending, just because like last year, Ottawa was able to get up a guy like Jake Sanderson. And Sanderson's a big boy, and he's going to be a physical defenseman for them. And obviously, you could always use defensemen, right? Mm-hmm. But if Wellstead's on the board here, I think that this is more of an ideal situation for him to be drafted. I don't know, I don't expect him to go early. I don't expect him to go in the top 10, but if he does go in the top 10, I think it will be Ottawa. They have Matt Murray. He's under contract for a little while. Matt Murray has been very hit or miss on every team that he's been on, Pittsburgh and Ottawa. He's been hit or miss. He'll have a good year or he'll have a bad year. And they just lost Joey Decord, who was a decent goaltending prospect that they had, to the Kraken. So I don't mind them going Wallstead here. I don't think that they need to go forward. I don't think it's a necessary thing right now, because I expect them to be in the top 10 again next year. They're going to take a little time. They do have really good prospects to go, but I don't think that they're as close as a team like LA or the Rangers in terms of their prospects. Like if you rank the prospect pools, right, it probably goes LA, New York, Ottawa next. And Ottawa is not nearly, they're about 2, 3, 4 years away from their prospects coming into the NHL and even starting to make an impact. Whereas LA, a lot of those guys could make the NHL next year or halfway through the year and start to make an impact right away. The Rangers, they're right there as well, where their guys are just this close to the NHL and ready to make that impact. So I think that if he's there, Brandt Clarke's a good pick for him. I don't know. I think in my expectation, I think that Edmondson would go first over Clarke. But even if Luke Hughes is there too, he's like I said before, he's a guy that I could see slipping a little bit in the rankings, because he's been all over the board from what the scouts have been saying. He could be 5, he could be 11, he could be 8, he could be 9. So if he's there, I think Ottawa goes with him. He's got a little bit more development than most of the defensemen available in the draft, but you are getting size and you're getting skill rather than just the defenseman that's closer to being ready right now. So that's it for the top 10. We're not going to cover all 31 because that would be insanity. And like we said before, there's just not enough out there right now on these prospects, with it being a weird year. There's not enough information on all these guys. So the last thing I guess we'll cover is, do you expect any draft day deals tomorrow in the first round? We won't talk about the second day, because a lot of the second day is usually just guys moving up and down in the second or third round, and it's not really players. But do you expect a trade of any type of player tomorrow night?
So I'm not too sure about specific players that I could see moving, but teams that I could maybe see trading up or down. I mean, like you mentioned at the beginning, Sabres definitely, if they're not completely sold on someone that they could take in the first pick, that they don't think they could get someone as equal or just as good at a later pick, then I could definitely see the Sabres moving down. But I mean, and as a player, I mean, let me hear what you have to say first, and then I'll try and think of some other guys off of that.
I think that there's going to be a few trades tomorrow night, or whether they're not tomorrow night, but a couple of days after the draft, I could definitely see that being the case. I'm interested to see what our team, the Sabres, do. I don't know I doubt it'll be Jack, like a lot of people think. I think if there's anything that happens tomorrow, the most likely scenario would be Ristolainen. But Reinhardt's an interesting one too, because apparently the interest is really picking up on him. At Calgary, I could see them moving Matthew Tkachuk. There's been a lot out there on how the Flames may be looking to go in a different direction, and they're, Johnny Gaudreau's been in the rumor mill for years now. He could be a guy that I could see getting moved. They just lost Giordano on the expansion draft. I think they're ready to kind of start over, because they've been a team that they can make the playoffs, but they can't get out of that first round, no matter who they add, what goaltending they bring in, anything like that, what coach they have. So I think that a full rebuild is kind of on the way for them. So I could definitely see a lot of movement with them. Arizona made some moves today, so I would have thought that maybe Arizona would be active at the draft, but they, like I said, made a couple of trades today already. They got Shane Gostisbehere on defense. They added someone else as well too. I can't remember who it was. And then one more team that I could see being a little bit active would be Montreal.
Okay.
They didn't make the finals. They didn't win in the finals. I don't know why I said didn't make the finals. They didn't win in the finals, and they exposed Carey Price. They exposed guys like Phil Deneau and Jonathan Drouin. So I think, to me, that's a sign that Marc Bergevin is, he's kind of open for business. He's willing to make that deal. And, there's a lot of guys that need new contracts on Montreal, and it's going to be a little bit of a youth movement there. So I don't know any specific players. If there's anybody on Montreal that I would expect to maybe be moved, I think it would be Phil Deneau. I think Drouin's okay. I think Carey Price isn't going anywhere. Hard to move that with the no move clause and a $10.5 million cap hit. So, yeah. And then Shea Weber is interesting too. Does he get dealt?
Yeah.
He's got a lot of injury concerns. So if he does get dealt, it's not going to be a good package at all. It's a situation right now where they've literally said it could be the end of his career. But if it isn't, and a team's willing to take that shot on Shea Weber and pay the price of like a third rounder or even a second rounder to Montreal, maybe you get a good defenseman with a lot of veteran presence and captaincy skills and all that for a year or two.
Yeah, and I was actually just about to speak on that too. I was going to mention that I also saw a report earlier that it said Shea Weber is most likely going to need surgery because he was playing through an already injured, I think it was either thumb or wrist, throughout the playoffs.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, there are concerns that he might just not be back for this next season, and he might just retire without ever playing again. So, right. I mean, like you mentioned, I don't know how much the teams have been in talks, but you said Seth Jones is most likely moving away from Columbus. I mean, Montreal could be in the market for him. They could say, hey, our defenseman's getting older. He might never play again. We need somebody else to fill in that hole. So,
I wouldn't be surprised if they've had talks about Seth Jones for sure. Montreal's supposedly in on Rasmus Ristolainen, and if they're looking for a big body defenseman, you got two options right now in the trade market, and that's Ristolainen and that's Seth Jones. I don't know if I see any other, big names on the move. Maybe a couple, smaller deals and things like that. But I definitely expect to see a lot of a goaltending carousel this year. Whether that, I don't know that it'll be trades, but definitely in free agency, I think you're going to see a lot of goalies on the move again, just like last year. So that's kind of what I'm expecting for the draft. And as far as trades go, And as far as our top 10, we covered that already. So you have anybody else that maybe you're thinking traded or?
Patty Kane to Buffalo.
No, yeah. You were gonna fit that in either way. I knew you were gonna. No.
No, but off the top of my head, right now I can't really think of anybody else.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you got anything else that you want to cover for the draft here?
Not really. I mean, I just saw news that Taylor Hall's finalizing that deal with the Bruins, but we were already talking about that earlier. So
Yeah.
we talked about that earlier.
4 years times $6 million, $24 million for Taylor Hall.
And the no trade clause.
Yes, that's the big one.
So if he wants to dick over Boston like he did us, then
I think that's going to come back to bite Boston in the butt a little bit. Maybe in the last 2 years or maybe the last year. But for now, I mean, he played good there. That's another depth winger for them. It didn't cost them as much as it did Buffalo. So, and they have him for some term. So that's, a decent deal for Boston. But all right. Anything else at all?
No, I got nothing.
All right. Well, if you want to wrap up, I think that's all we got then.
All righty. Well, as usual then, for anybody that watches this on YouTube, thank you for the support. Hopefully maybe in the next year, once we're all done with college, we can actually get some sort of live setup going and hopefully, stream live on either Twitch or YouTube or something. I mean, that's something we talked about when we first started the podcast. I think that's something that both Matt and I want to do eventually is a live episode just to get a feel for it and be a different change of environment. Other than that though, definitely follow the socials at ZNG711 on Instagram, at ReadyPack5 on Instagram, as well as the personal podcast, which is, I figured it out. It's at KQC_podcast. So follow that. I'm definitely going to be a lot more active on the account. Matt also has the login for it, I think. So I'm going to be trying to post just different random sports updates from the major leagues in both America. There's nothing going on in Europe right now, soccer and all that. So right now we're just covering really the sports that are either starting to heat up or are in mid-season form right now. So just follow that for any different reports. And Matt and I and maybe some others are going to just hopefully keep grinding out some episodes. So for anybody that's watching, again, thank you for your support. And hopefully you continue to tune in and maybe learn some stuff. So have a nice day, guys.